Hey guys, just want to take a second to thank our sponsor, Carnivore Bar. I don't promote many products because honestly, all you need to be healthy is just eat meat, and that's what you should do. But if you're hiking or road tripping or stuck at work and you want something nutritious that is just meat, fat, and possibly salt if you want it, the Carnivore Bar is a great option. I like this product not only because it is pure meat, but also because I really want the carnivore market to thrive as well. The more we support meat-only products, the more people will make meat-only products, and this will bring this into the mainstream. So if this sounds like something you'd like to check out, then take a look and use my discount code HTC to get 10% off, which also applies to subscriptions, giving you 25% off total. All right, thanks guys.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the How to Carnivore podcast. We're joined by Dr. Anthony Chaffee, the plant-free MD again. Welcome, Anthony.
Hey, yeah, thanks, man. Good to see you.
Likewise, good to have you here. And we've got a special guest, Dr. Max Gulhane. I think I pronounced the last name right, who's from Albury here in Australia and is a low-carb / carnivore doctor getting amazing results with his clients. So I can't wait to learn more about you. Welcome, Max.
Hey Simon, how you going? And hey Anthony, good to be on your podcast, gentlemen.
Good to
Yeah,
have you
yeah,
here.
great. Yeah, yeah. And Max had me on his podcast, which was great, and had a great talk there. And so thankfully, you were able to come on with us. So that's great. Thank you for that.
Yeah, awesome. I'm stoked to talk to you guys and give you a bit of an idea about what's happening down here in Albury.
Yeah, it sounds like there is a lot happening between you and Jacob Wolke, who Dr. Chaffee and I have also interviewed. He was awesome. So yeah, we had to get you on. So Max, what was it that triggered you to head down the low carb / carnivore rabbit hole as a doctor?
Yeah, so I basically was going through early 20s, doing a bit of exercise, doing a bit of cycling, and not having a lot of intentional thought about my diet. And at the time I was drinking a lot of those up and go shakes, we'd go for a big ride, and before we'd go out, we'd have an up and go, eating oats, all kinds of just generally not junk, but carbohydrate based food that, was thought was healthy. And throughout that early 20s, I developed quite bad acne on my face. And as you can imagine, it's not ideal to be suffering from acne in the early 20s, where most people have that problem during their teenage years. So I developed this acne, and I went to a dermatologist after obviously failing the kind of first line treatment. And a story with the dermatologist was I was put on escalating doses and of a progression of pharmaceutical drugs to kind of treat this skin problem. And Anthony will know that I got put on antibiotics like doxycycline. And doxycycline is an antibiotic that we use for atypical pneumonias, and if you get a cut by some obscure marine bacterial pathogen, you get put on doxycycline, and if you're going for malaria prophylaxis, you get put on doxycycline. So it's an antibiotic, and that we're using it for acne treatment. So I got on doxycycline, didn't work. Went saw the dermatologist again, got put on minocycline, which is another tetracycline antibiotic. That didn't work. So I ended up on a drug called accutane or isotretinoin, and that's a pretty heavy duty drug. It's a vitamin A analog, and it's used for a whole range of kind of very specific medical treatment reasons. And that was around my early mid 20s, and I just made me feel absolutely horrible. And this is a very protracted, drawn out process. And not once did the dermatologist mention or discuss lifestyle and diet or anything like that. So I ended up going off the isotretinoin because it just made my mood too bad. And at that point, I was in medical school, and around that time there was a lot about plant-based eating, and maybe I was an early adopter. This was back in 2017. I thought, okay, plant-based eating is good for me, it's good for the planet, it's good for everyone. This is going to be a good solution to my health issue and to help everyone else. Short story, or to cut a long story short, basically 18 months of worsening acne, bloating, recurrent upper respiratory tract infections, just generally feeling quite off, and no improvement at all. So that kind of process of, hitting kind of rock bottom with my skin, with my digestion, and being in medical school, I thought, come on, there's got to be a better way around this. And nothing I was being taught in medical school was giving me any answer to my own health problem. So at that point, I stumbled upon the Low Carb Down Under YouTube page, which a lot of your listeners would know is an amazing repository of information about low carbohydrate and lifestyle medicine. And at that point, I watched a lot of low carb videos. I cut out the grains, I cut out the sugar, I cut out all the tofu and all these kind of foods, and my symptoms started getting better. And just it was a gradual improvement. And then around the end of my medical school training, I was eating a keto, low carb diet. I had my kangaroo steak and my salad, in a salad that I was taking to medical school. And at that point, I was also watching a lot of Paul Saladino and Sean Baker, more of the carnivore type doctors. And I remember fiddling with my meal, and I'd eaten all my meat, and I was, gazing down at these spinach leaves. And I just thought to myself, like, is this really necessary? As I'm trying to force them into my mouth. And at that point, I tried to go, I went full carnivore. And that process was very, very, very interesting, because I found it basically another gear above. And I felt amazing at another level above what I had been feeling. So that was in, the beginning of 2019, and it's 23 now. So I've been mostly carnivore since then, periods of interspersed with some fruit consumption when I was living at a higher latitude, and periods of fermented veggies I'd include at some points. But having moved right back down to Albury, I'm basically 100% carnivore again, and feeling fantastic. So that's, I guess, my story. And it's one of being a patient, I think, first, and having that brush with the medical system, and finding myself not being served and not being given the right advice. That was the kind of stimulus for me to explore this area and then offer that to my patients.
Yeah. Well, great. And so have you been able to incorporate that into your practice as well?
Yeah, so I have. I worked in emergency medicine after I graduated med school for a couple of years, and then I moved down to Albury particularly to do general practice training. And I chose this place because it's a mentor of mine, Dr. Rob Sabo, who you might know. He's a very experienced and old, as in he's been in the game for a long time in diabetes reversal and using low carb and carnivore. So I relocated here to kind of work with him and learn off him. And that's what I've been doing. So since February, I've been using the low carb and carnivore as a treatment option in patients who are interested and willing and to attempt to reverse their obesity, their metabolic disease, their fatty liver, getting some really great results already. So it's been fantastic.
Right. What are some of the results that you're getting? Is it just because there's obviously Professor Steve Phinney has shown in clinical trials that you can reverse type 2 diabetes with just a ketogenic diet in general, which of course a carnivore diet is, unless you're not just eating meat. But if you are just eating meat, then it should be. And so what have your results been?
Yeah, so what I've seen so far is mostly been weight loss. So I've had patients come to me for weight loss, and look, I give them an option, and I say, depending on what your lifestyle, depending on where you're at, depending on your family situation, we can do this as quickly or as slowly as you'd like. And certain group of patients.
Yeah, we just lost Max for a second.
By eating only meat, and the results that I've seen from patients who are eating mostly a carnivore diet and perhaps a restricted eating window, or only 1 or 2 meals per day, within 2 weeks, after my initial consult, 3 kilos, 4 kilos of weight, 3-4 centimeters off the waist circumference is very common. And they're so happy. They walk in with the biggest smile on their face, beaming. And I think of one patient in particular, and I've seen him about maybe 3 times or 4 times in the past 2 months. And he walked into the room, on Thursday, And I could, the amount of weight he's lost it's incredible. And you can see how great he looks, and he's got so much energy. So yeah, it's going really well.
Is he carnivore or low carb?
So he's carnivore. He's fully carnivore.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so obviously because you are limited in time in your consultations, to give that big full rundown on this, obviously it's not always possible to do that in the consultation setting. You have a packet of information and things like that and homework to send them home to go read up on themselves.
Yeah, definitely. And unfortunately I don't have any to show you, but I basically just made some A5 card printouts. And there's 4 that I have. One of them is what not to eat. And that's just got the 3 main criteria of processed foods, the carb and carbs. So carbohydrates, seed oils, and sugars. And then I've got another one that's the low carb handout, and another one that's specifically a carnivore handout, and then a one that's just got general food rules. So I basically go over the basics of it, and then I give them the patients the cards depending on what approach they want to take. And we basically go from there. The other thing that I do, which I've really found helpful, is I hand people off to my podcast. And Anthony, we recorded a couple months ago, and I've got another great podcast with Dr. Sean O'Mara, and these are really good intro, and Dr. Kiltz as well. Their introduction and they cover carnivore in a deeper way. So it's a really useful tool to extend the value of the consult and help the patient really understand, because they can just hear us talk and hear in a long form conversation, and really backs up what I've kind of discussed briefly in the consulting room.
Oh, which is great. And so I was just going to ask you, do you track their lab results? Obviously, you're going to be looking at their HbA1c, if this is with diabetes. You find, because this is something that's been coming up recently, someone on Twitter was saying that they're actually surprised. They promote an omnivorous sort of diet, but they are quite interested and surprised that long-term carnivores like Michaela Peterson aren't really having any nutrient deficiencies. I'm not having nutrient deficiencies. A lot of other people aren't either. Is this something that you track with your patients, and what have you seen?
Yeah, so the patients that I'm treating are basically starting their carnivore journey. So I haven't been longitudinally following any long-term carnivores. So I haven't seen any frank deficiencies on people who have treated a long-term carnivore myself. I guess I look at a range of markers, as you mentioned, insights into metabolic health. And the way I think about it is there's just simply like different windows into the same room when we think of things like raised fasting blood glucose, a raised fasting insulin, raised HbA1c. And then you've got other markers like your liver function, like your ALT, and your urate levels. So the way I think about it, they're just different organ manifestations of the common underlying metabolic dysfunction process. But it's interesting how we can measure all these labs, but so often it's simply just that waist measurement and calculating that waist to height ratio that I like to use. With a cutoff being 0.5 for guys and 0.48 for women that I use. It's just amazing how reliable that simple measurement is, and that is such a reliable marker of visceral fat that if someone has a raised waist circumference, I'm like, and raised waist to height ratio, I'm like, well, there's your problem. The test, the labs are just simply confirming what we already know. And I talked to Sean O'Mara, and he basically ran a concierge medical clinic process for heads of state, and he said, look, I had every lab at my fingertips, but essentially the most useful thing is identifying visceral fat, and he's using whole body MRI scanning to look at visceral fat at different parts of the body, so around the heart, obviously around the abdomen, and then looking at fatty infiltrate in the muscle, which is called myosinostosis, and just essentially identifying and showing the patient their visceral fat is just such a powerful way of identifying their metabolic dysfunction, and then giving them something to kind of hang on to measure their progress against.
I was, that reminds me, looking at that, visceral fat and the mastocytosis, like intramuscular fat. That's something that the point that I've made, when you're metabolically unhealthy, it's the same thing that's going to be causing that as it's causing metabolic unhealth, which is like, carb, sugar, things like that. It disrupts your metabolism. It disrupts your biochemistry and puts you in a different biochemical state, and you start storing fat in different areas. And this is why we give grains to cows and they get intramuscular fat. And so why would we think that we're any different? We're not. I look at MRIs every damn day and I see this stuff. I see this intramuscular fat. When I'm looking at the spine, I look, we're seeing down, the different sort of, paraspinal muscles and the different muscles, in the abdomen that you can see on these MRIs, and you can see this. You can see this fat in the muscle, and it fits their body habitus and their lifestyle. And so I make this point, and then I think people like Lane Norton, things like that. It's like, oh my God, what is this hogwash? It's called biochemistry, Lane. You might want to look into it. And that's the thing, and that is what we are seeing as clinicians. We are looking at the scans. He's not looking at scans. He's never seen a patient. He's not a medical practitioner, and so all of his entire field is purely theoretical and wrong. And so, when you look at these things in practice and you see actual patients in the real world settings, you see this intramuscular fat. You see this deposition of fat in the muscles, and that is a clear sign of metabolic dysfunction and poor health, and also pain. There was a conference in spinal surgery that they were talking about that intramuscular fat in the paraspinal muscles and things like that correlates very strongly with back pain and back pain that was not going to be fixed with surgery. So, it is something that we see, and it looks like, you're seeing this as well.
Yeah, and that actually was the stimulus for Dr. Sean O'Mara to actually look at visceral fat, because they were doing a case series or a very long cohort analysis on people with lower back pain, because it's so common in the US. And what they've noticed after just looking after MRI after MRI after MRI is that the common denominator for the patients with symptomatic back pain was the presence of visceral fat. So if you've got this visceral fat that's pro-inflammatory, that's leaching out these pro-inflammatory cytokines, sensitizing the nerves, all this kind of thing, that's your answer to why these patients are having pain. So the visceral fat is underlying this disease process. It's the common denominator, and you can go into PubMed and you can type in kind of any disease basically and visceral fat, and you will find that that's the common denominator. Polycystic ovary syndrome and visceral fat, hypertension and visceral fat, obviously diabetes and visceral fat, fatty liver and visceral fat. It's all, if the presence of visceral fat is in my opinion, the primary disease process that's driving this smoldering metabolic inflammation that is causing so much morbidity and so much pain in chronic disease in general.
Yeah. So is it one thing, because I follow Dr. Sean O'Mara as well, and I really like his stuff. And I've sort of wondered whether it sounds like the visceral fat is causing the issues rather than just being the result of poor metabolic health and poor overall health. Is that kind of the gist, Max?
Yeah, look, that's how I think about it. And if we're thinking about the contributors to visceral fat, processed food, seed oils, carbs, and sugars, alcohol, stress, so cortisol, constant stress and higher cortisol causes deposition of visceral fat. Circadian disruption, that's the reason I'm wearing these glasses. It's chronic exposure to blue light and disruption of the normal circadian rhythm and poor sleep will cause deposition of visceral fat. And Dr. O'Mara has also noticed chronic cardio exercises can lead to visceral fat deposition. So these are the processes that are, I guess, all contributing to the accumulation of visceral fat. And I think that's the primary problem. And if we think biochemically, when there is stress of those adipocytes through exposure to excessive linoleic acid breakdown products from seed oils, too much sugar, carbohydrates, that the stress in those adipocytes then kind of starts making them spill out pro-inflammatory factors, which then causes insulin resistance in the liver, and then the process goes from there. So yeah, the crux of the issue, and I guess the simple the answer is that, measure that waist circumference if you don't have any resources, and if you have, the most resources, get a full body MRI, get an MRI and look at it, but identify your visceral fat and then do something about it. I think that's the main message.
Yeah.
Max, Dr. Sean O'Mara is also like big into sprinting and resistance exercise, and obviously sleep and stuff as well. Do you try and get that kind of whole message across, or is it purely nutrition?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and look, I try and approach this problem as holistically as possible, and I actually take it even a step further back from that, and I use a dichotomy that Dr. Lucy Burns kind of uses, which is the drivers of visceral fat and obesity, physiology and psychology. So everything about visceral fat that we've talked about falls under the physiology category, but almost equally important is the psychology side of things. And I kind of break that down. I talk to patients about this, because you can understand, in your brain, in your cortex, you can understand the concepts of insulin resistance. You can understand all these, biochemical pathways. But if you have behavior patterns, entrenched habit loops that are sabotaging, or is a form of self-sabotage and kind of facilitating a food or sugar addiction, then it doesn't matter how much you understand that intellectually, you're not going to make any progress from a health point of view. So as I mentioned, it's like identifying what kind of deep-seated trauma is in place. What are there comfort eating? Is this a form of self-medication of anxiety? And when I kind of discuss those things with patients who are struggling to lose weight, or who are even admitted that they use sugary foods as a kind of crutch, then I think helping them on a concurrent journey of addressing the psychological drivers and the physiological drivers is the most effective approach. But to your point about exercise, and that's another interesting point, I'm of the opinion that we have to address the diet first. And often people are so weighed down by brain fog and by just general fatigue of being in this inflamed metabolic state, that making them exercise or prescribing exercise before we've made headway on this brain fog and this general feeling of tiredness is not really appropriate. And when I'm sure you guys have seen, driving on a Sunday morning, you see overweight people flogging themselves in a CrossFit gym, under fluorescent light. It's 7 a.m. on a Sunday morning, sweating buckets. And I just feel so bad for them, because, that is not the correct order of operations in my mind. And so, yeah, it's all about allowing that initial healing phase, in my opinion, to occur with our diet, our light diet and our food diet. And then once they've got more energy, recommending resistance training, walking, wherever the patient's at. So that's my
spot on.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say quickly, I agree with that, and I think that a lot of people, especially now, are in a state that they really do need to address the diet side first and get into a point of health that they can even safely exercise or have the energy to exercise. Some people, are very unwell, very sick, and the weight can be a part of that, but there's generally more health issues going on as well. And addressing the diet and addressing that and fixing that first, and they start feeling better, their body starts working better, they're going to get a lot more out of their exercise as well.
Yes.
The amount of effort that they put in, they'll get a lot more return on their investment as well. I remember seeing something, I think Dr. Peter Attia was on, maybe it was Huberman. It was just sort of a quick clip, and he said that he thinks that the main thing is exercise. He thinks it's most things exercise. He's just saying, hey, if you can't do 10 pull-ups, if you can't do 50 push-ups or whatever he said, if you can't do certain exercises to a certain degree, you need to focus on that first. You don't want to split hairs about the fine details about perfecting a carnivore diet or a keto diet or whatever diet. You need to address that first. And I agree in the sense that if you've already got the diet down and then you're just doing these fine little tweaks, probably not, the best, value for money, right? And that you need to start working out. So like, us in our case here, are we going to get the most bang for our buck saying, well, if you just tweak it just like this, that's going to change it. Really, the three of us need to go to the gym. That's where we're at. That's where we're going to get, more value for our money. Whereas someone else who's just coming to this and hasn't, lost the weight and or started to lose weight and started to reverse their health issues, they might not be in a position that they're ever going to be able to do 10 pull-ups. Maybe they need to lose 200 pounds first before they could start doing pull-ups as well. And so I think that you do have to get that order right, and especially depending on where someone's coming from. If they're quite unhealthy, you really need to get that diet right first. You need to get their health in order from that standpoint first, and then you maximize it with resistance training and so on.
Yeah. And look, I think it also feeds into this kind of collective societal trauma around food and eating and diet. And I gave a talk recently at a restaurant here in Albury at the same time as Jake, and I talked about this idea of the dietary guidelines and how it's been, since 1982 was the first edition of the Australian Dietary Guidelines, and you can plot the proportion of adults in Australia who are overweight and obese, and it was somewhere around 13% in the early 80s, and it's sitting well above 20%. And you can just see at each interval of a new edition has been released, there's no attenuation of that curve and that trend line up and to the right. And, as you and I, Anthony and Simon, we'd make the claim that, in fact, these guidelines have actually exacerbated the problem. So you've had a basically generation of people who have a form of psychological trauma because they've followed guidelines. And I think people are, they're doing the right thing. They're trying to do what they think is the right thing. Yet they've put on all this weight and they've been told to eat less and move more. So to kind of emphasize exercise as the first port of call for weight loss and metabolic health is almost, in my mind, really feeding into that victim blaming mindset of, you're just lazy, you need to just exercise some more. So I completely disagree with that. And again, we can talk about the biochemistry of, say, patients with, awaiting osteoarthritis, awaiting joint replacement. We know that when they resolve their metabolic dysfunction and that fatty liver, they get improvements in joint pain that are unrelated to mechanical loading. So the liver stops making, matrix metalloproteinases that are inflaming those articular surfaces. That's got nothing to do with actual weight loss. It's to do with the metabolic inflammation that's happening in the body and the hyperinsulinemia. So, and once those patients have, after a couple of weeks, got that initial phase of improvement in their metabolic function, then their joints hurt less, and then they can start doing some exercise. So again, it's all about the order of operations, and I really think we have to look at light diet, food diet, before we recommend exercise.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly, and especially for people that are unwell. If this is just someone who's just trying to just improve their health and do whatever. And is in relatively good shape, well, then they can absolutely incorporate an exercise program along with dietary changes. I think what Dr. T was saying was that, if you've been on some like a carnivore diet for a while and you've been doing that for a while, getting into the sort of the last bits of fine tuning it, maybe you should look at something that's more on broken ground that you should spend your time on. And I've got a lot of respect for him as well. I don't want to, people that think that I'm bashing him, because I'm not. I'm just saying that I think it's very important to make that distinction, that if someone is unhealthy and someone has, weight to lose, but metabolic issues to reverse, that's really important. Because the first thing that popped to my mind when you said that was just like, well, I mean, some people can't do a push up, a pull up, and they're not going to be able to until they get their health in order, and the diet is going to facilitate that, and the diet's going to get them into a point of health that they're able to exercise, that they're able to do push-ups and sit-ups and pull-ups and things like that. So I think that it depends on where you're starting from, and if someone's quite unwell, I think absolutely the diet, and even for someone who's in relatively good shape and lean, I think diet is way more important, getting that right, than just the exercise. Like, I don't exercise all that often. I love exercising. I feel much better when I do it, but I just I don't always have the time. And so, but with my diet, I'm always in shape. I'm never out of shape. I can get in better shape, but I'm never out of shape. I never go out of shape, and I always feel great. And depending on whatever you're doing, if you're eating right, you're going to get more out of it. The exercise that you do, the hard work that you put in, is and the benefit that you get out of it is a direct function of what's going in your body. And so if you're putting in high octane crap, or even a little bit of crap, you're not going to be working quite right. Your body's not going to be able to respond in quite the same way. You're not going to be able to work as hard, not going to be able to push yourself. You're not going to be able to recover as well, and heal as well, and build as well. And so I think that I fully agree with you that you get the diet right first, and then you start looking at other pastures. But at the same time, if you're eating 97% meat and maybe you have a little bit here and there, I think you can now start looking at other things as well if you're healthy enough.
Yeah, no, good. That's a very good point. And I sometimes say to patients, imagine if you had a Ferrari and you're pouring in, cheap ethanol fuel into the tank. Well, yeah, sure, you might fill up a couple of tanks and it won't make any difference. But if you've done 10 years of putting ethanol in your, V12 sports car engine, you're going to expect there's going to be wear and tear. So, and I don't know about exactly your audience, Anthony, but it's very important to make that distinction. And if you're a patient, if you're taking medications, taking insulin, high anti blood pressure medications, you're really in a different category to people who are just maybe a little bit overweight and wanting to lose a bit of weight, and they're able to exercise, have no pre-existing medical conditions. So those are two different groups of people, and I'm really speaking to the patients, because those type of people really should be seeing someone, and especially if they want to try and come off medications. Look, and he was a story not too long ago. I had a patient, and she has had quite severe heart failure, and started a carnivore type diet themselves. And and amazing results. I mean, in 3 weeks, lost 9 kilograms, and symptoms of exertional breathlessness was resolving. Fluid that had been retained for a very long time is coming off. But it's interesting how that this is such a powerful therapeutic tool. But if you're a patient and you're unwell and you're medicated, it really should be supervised, because we need to be helping you and guiding you through the process of often deprescribing these medications, not just doing it by yourself.
Yeah, that's really important, and that's something I try to stress to people, that when you need the guidance of a doctor if you're on different medications, especially blood pressure, blood sugar medications, because you will be over medicated quite quickly, which is good. You're going to need less medications because your body's getting better on its own. You don't need them. But the problem is that if you're still on them, then it can be much too much. You can potentially get low blood sugar, which can be dangerous or life-threatening. You can get very low blood pressure, which can also be life-threatening and dangerous. And just by simple virtue of the fact you get up, you get lightheaded, you fall down, you hit your head, and you don't wake up again. And and so it's very important to be cognizant of that, and to talk to your doctor ahead of time, and just say, hey, this is what I'm doing. These are the results other people are getting. They expect that this will go in that way. I may be needing to titrate my medications down. Let's work together on that. And hopefully you have a doctor that's willing and able to do that. But yeah, it's very, very important, because you can run into serious trouble when medications are involved.
Yeah. Yeah. So very, very, very strongly encourage everyone. And look, that's another part of, I think, the what we as doctors owe to our patients. We owe it to our patients to be able to facilitate that process. There's safe injecting rooms for people who choose to use intravenous drugs. So people are going to make lifestyle changes whether or not it's been officially sanctioned from every kind of, body. So if people are going to do it, we need, as doctors, need to be in a position to be able to help them and safely support them in whatever choice they make. So that's I guess a call to any doctors listening to try and understand this process, because your patients need you as this the lifestyle benefits have become so more and more well known that people are going to be doing these kind of things by themselves if there's no one else to help them.
Oh, some you're muted.
Sorry, guys. Max, you got a very powerful message and you're already helping people. What's kind of the next step for you? Like, where do you want to take this practice and this message?
Yeah, so I think that the message that I want to promote as widely as I can is that access to lifestyle advice to help people thrive. And I really conceive of this or my role in I've got a kind of stair type diagram. So if your listeners can imagine 3 stairs, and at the bottom of the stair you've got a person who's dying. They're in a hospital bed, they're dying. You go up 1 stair and there's someone who's merely surviving. And I think that's the majority of people in today in the West and around the world, is that they're going to their job, they're getting things done, but they're miserable. They might be anxious or depressed. They're overweight. They've got metabolic dysfunction. They've got visceral fat. They might have irregular periods. They might be suffering from infertility, polycystic ovary syndrome, all the rest. So they're menorrhagia and erectile dysfunction, you name it. They're in that middle step, which is merely surviving. There's a 3rd step, and that is the top step, which is thriving. And that is what everyone is capable of. And that's, having boundless energy, waking up grateful and happy and joyful, full of energy every morning, having energy to look after yourself. And I always say to patients, you've got to put your oxygen mask on first before you help anyone else. When you are at that top level, when you are thriving, you are able to help everyone around you. You are able to be a better partner, a better son, a better father, a better contributor to people in your community. And to get from those different steps, well, what gets you from dying to surviving? That's modern medicine, and that's what Anthony and I got taught at medical school. But modern medicine can't get you from surviving to thriving. To get to that top step, you need optimal diet and lifestyle. So I guess my focus is really giving the idea or promoting the idea that we need that optimal diet and lifestyle to help our patients get hopefully from either dying or merely surviving to living their most optimal self. And there's so many facets to this, but obviously the low carbohydrate and animal-based diet is key, because like Anthony, I believe that that's the most evolutionarily appropriate diet. A key kind of branch or facet to this whole idea is that what are the ethical obligations for someone who is recommending such wide consumption of animal foods? And this is where my kind of link and my partnership with Jake Wolke at the Wolke Farm, which is a regenerative farm, comes in. Because if I'm telling people, look, you should only be eating meat, then that's an option for you, then what I believe there is an obligation is that meat should be ethically raised with the highest ethical standards, so that there's a least amount of animal suffering. It should be the least impactful to the environment, and ideally, if it can regenerate the environment, then that would be ideal. So that's where regenerative farming comes in, and basically the process of grazing the cattle in an intensively holistic way, which involves regular paddock moves and allowing paddocks to regenerate and grow after, over a period of months. That type of agricultural technique provides the most nutrient dense food, because the animals are in their native habitat, eating their species appropriate diet. So the kind of holistic, even bigger picture view is to get optimal human health, we need optimal animal health. We need to be eating the healthiest animals, and to be eating the healthiest animals, we need the healthiest soil. So to take my approach all the way back to its fundamentals, regenerative farming is at the base of that process. And the more people we can promote and to support regenerative farming, the more land we can improve in terms of soil quality, microbial quality, and other kind of environmental indices. The more animals we save from factory farming, the more pigs we take out of these hideous factory farms and these poor chickens that are getting their beaks cut off, which people don't realize if they're buying Woolworths meat. So that's, I guess, the holistic picture. And it's funny because the holistic human health requires holistic animal and ecosystem health. So I guess that's the vision, to answer your question in a very long way, Simon, is that this is a holistic vision, and it goes way beyond just the GP clinic room.
Awesome. And that sort of ties into the other question we were talking about just before we went on, which was, what sparked you to start the podcast in the first place?
Yeah. So that's I've been following the low carb, as I mentioned earlier. I've been following low carb down under for 5-6 years, and I thought there came a point where I realized that it wasn't okay anymore to just be merely a bystander. In that Spider-Man movie, with great power comes great responsibility. If I had if I had an understanding, like a biochemical and a physiological understanding of how to help people and having seen that with my own experience, I felt I had an obligation to really speak and advocate on behalf of this approach, if it meant helping patients avoid what I had to go through, which was a couple of years of unnecessarily pharmaceutical treatment of a condition that didn't even address its underlying causes. So I see, and I continue to see so much suffering, and unnecessary suffering, which was the kind of stimulus for me to be a bit more vocal and hopefully help people by giving them access to information. And I can see a patient for half an hour, and I might see 18 patients a day. But Anthony, 26,000 people have watched our interview. So I mean, how powerful is that?
Nice work, guys.
It's, and not to brag, but simply to illustrate the power of social media and these online platforms for helping people help themselves. So that's the crux of it. And I'm sure, Anthony, you'd agree, is that you can't help anyone who isn't ready themselves to be helped. So I don't push anything on anyone. I see myself as just someone who's there to give a patient options and support them with whatever decision they want to choose. And there will be people that, for whatever reason, their life circumstances, then they're not yet ready to give away their prescription for their diabetic medication. They're not yet ready to make big dietary changes. That's fine. I meet them where they are. But for people who are willing and able, and would do something about it, then they deserve access to the information to help themselves. So I guess that's why I've been more vocal lately about this approach.
Oh, that's good. How long have you been on the podcast now?
Oh, I think we started in December, so it's been 5 months.
Oh, great.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I agree. It's I think it is really important to get this stuff out there and to reach more people. And even in my local community, like when I, just me living the way I do and eating the way I do, talking to people, they say like, "Oh, what's that about?" And then I talk to them. I have one-on-one conversations, and especially doctors, they're like, "That makes sense. All of this stuff checks out." And can you send me some of those resources? Absolutely. And then you do, and they go like, okay. And a lot of people buy into it and change it themselves, and then that sort of branches out from there. But it was when I was doing more podcasts and just being interviewed on other people's podcasts, other people started seeing them, and even like the consultants and things like that in my department started seeing my podcast before I started my podcast, and they were like, "Hey, I saw a podcast you were on." I'm like, "Really? Like, why would you do that?" And but they were interested about it, and you would ask me more about it, and same thing, it would be like, yeah, it makes sense, like what you're saying makes sense, and so you go on like that. But it wasn't until I started my own podcast that really started to get even bigger and bigger, and then people in Perth, in particular, started. I've had doctors that I've interacted with but have never spoken about my diet and choices with. All of a sudden, they'll just come up to me and just start talking to me and just deep in. It's like, yeah. So I saw that guy that was on your, like they were talking about like, the guy from Mason Survival, who does like really slow like exercise in his backyard and just lifting weights in his backyard and it's like, oh yeah, I really like that. And, I'm eating once a day. I'm doing this thing. And he's like talking to me like we've had 1,000 conversations about this, and I've never spoken to him about this in my life. And it's really interesting because they've obviously seen my podcast, they've seen my things, and that's influenced them to change their lives, and which is great, and so it's something that you can reach a lot more people with.
Yeah, and you can't underestimate the positive effects that you can have, and even helping one person, the patient will come in, but often if they're in a family, the people in the family will make the same dietary changes. So it's incredible and really encouraging to see the rippling effect of a positive lifestyle changes on whole families and then communities. And I think to not to sound too idealistic, but this is how the world changes one person at a time. And as that one person changes, then the family can change, then the family changes, a community changes, and then it's the town, then it's the city, the country, and then, it ripples out concentrically, but it starts with the individual.
Yeah. And just the Jordan Peterson comment of just like, what can I do to change the world? What can I do to all these sorts of things? Like clean your room, start at the beginning. Like, well, how do I get my life in order? You clean your room. How do I change the world? You clean your room. You start there, you clean your room, you do that. Then you start saying, okay, I clean my room. That's done. What else can I fix? What else can I do in my life? If you get your life in order, you're going to be that first person. You're going to be that ripple or that pebble that starts the ripple in the lake. And that's something that can grow. But it has to start with you. And you can't just say like, well, my life is shit, so I'm going to go over here and try to, change other people's lives. Well, that's not how it's going to work. Or saying my life is shit because the world is shit, so I have to go fix. No. You can fix things in your own life. That's really the only thing you have control over. But once you do that, then you start affecting other people. And this was the idea in America of just decentralizing everything, just having things in just your own, the individual first, and then going into the smaller communities and you deciding and fixing your own life and living your own life, taking care of your own life, and then making communities together of like-minded individuals and being able to self-govern and say, okay, well, these are the rules that we want to play by and that we're happy with. And it just goes out from there and out from there and out from there. And, you had 150 years of that model in America. And that was the largest and fastest growth and prosperity at the bottom level that the world has ever seen. No other society has ever grown in prosperity or the lowest level up than in that period of 150 years before Woodrow Wilson came in and the Fed and all the different changes that FDR made. So it was very, very, very good for people starting off as the individual, taking care of your life, taking control of your life, and then working out from there. And so it absolutely makes a massive difference on yourself, but also in your community and the world at large.
Yeah. Yeah. And you don't even have to have, grandly altruistic plans to kind of take this kind of message on board, because even if your altruism only goes as far as your family, how can you help someone if you yourself are sick? I mean, you can't. You're not of use to anyone if you haven't, as Anthony said, cleaned your own room. So clean up your own diet first, and then you're going to have enough energy, power, and strength to kind of help the people around you. On the topic of that, what you just mentioned, decentralization, I think that is essentially what I believe is the solution. And what we're doing, or what we're encouraging, is a decentralization of the sourcing of our food. And we're going from a model where people have been historically sourcing their meat from feedlot, factory farmed pork, factory farmed chicken, caged eggs, with all the poor animal welfare, or they've sourced it from a massively centralized monocropped farm that's using all manner of industrial herbicides, petrochemical derived fertilizers, fungicides, and they're still very centralized. And what we're seeing works in terms of helping people's health is a decentralized approach where you've got hubs like in your regenerative farms, like the Walkie farm. There's a farm, Tall Poppy Farm, down in Mount Macedon in Melbourne. These are like little hubs, and each of them are growing their own version of the most nutrient dense food. And when we interact with them directly as consumers, and support them directly, we're cutting out all those big centralized players that have, through centralizing of their supply chain, made everyone sick, or supplied the food that has made everyone metabolically unwell. So by really changing the scale of our consumption as consumers, that's, I think, a critical part. And as you say, Anthony, it's that decentralized aspect to it, I think, is key.
Yeah, and even just taking control of where your food comes from. You can always find a Walkie farm, or you can find someone who's doing something in a way that you want, and you can go direct to the source. And Simon, you're in the business. That it matters where you're coming from, but also that there are options. That people can go to you and get this meat that you source, directly to a farmer. It's more difficult in Australia. In America, you can just call a farmer, call a rancher, and just say, "Hey, I want a cow." And you just, okay, fine. You negotiate a price and you get it. But that's really important for supporting those local businesses, but also they get more money from you buying direct from them, and you get it for much less money as well. As long as you're buying in bulk, obviously you have to buy the whole thing. And that helps everyone, and that keeps those supply lines running. Because right now there's some weird war on meat and in general, and people just want to shut that down. There've been dozens of fires of meat processing plants in America just last year. Over 1,000 chicken ranches and egg farms and things like that burned down just last year in America. Over 1,000. How could that be coincidence? How can those all have been accidents? They're not. I mean, someone is doing something deliberately. For who, I don't know who it is. I don't know why they're doing it. I don't know what the motivations are, but something's happening, and people are doing this, and it is damaging the food supply, and it's making things more expensive. Whereas if you just support your local farmer, rancher, whatever, that's going to be better for the environment. It's going to be better for the animals. It's going to be better for you, and it's going to keep those supply lines open. Because once those are gone, you're in trouble. And any war, everyone knows it's all about supplies, all about supply lines. Your supply lines get cut, you're in trouble. You are going to lose. You're going to have to run away, and people are going to die. So, just like with that interview I had with Maggie, the rancher up in Canada, she was saying, she's like, ranchers are going out of business. Ranchers are getting put out of business because it's not profitable to raise cattle anymore. There's like big beef and all these sorts of things. There's no such thing. These people are barely making ends meet, and a lot of the times they're not, and they're having to switch to something else, and they're using their land, or either selling their land because it's very valuable now, or they're turning to cash crops like corn and wheat because they get paid for that. They actually get a much higher payback for that. And so we can turn everybody's hearts and minds and say, hey, meat is really the way to go. But if those supplies are cut and those supply lines aren't there, there's not going to be anything for them to buy and to eat.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And earlier in the year, I actually spoke at an event called the Australian Beef Initiative, again, which was hosted down here in Albury at the Walkie Farm. And it's basically a movement with a bunch of people. There's a guy called Texas Slim from the US, from Texas. And he's spearheading a movement to really promote that grassroots sourcing of beef, and really promoting people trading directly with a farmer for regenerative meat as a way of feeding into what Anthony's just talked about, which is food security, food sovereignty, food transparency. So knowing that your cow hasn't been injected with all manner of synthetic hormonal agents. So it's a really really great kind of grassroots movement. I've got some interviews on my channel with Texas Slim. So it's a really interesting way that there's a kind of spontaneous decentralized movement that seems to be generating in response to the events that you've talked about, Anthony, just then, about things like COVID shutdowns of abattoirs, these massive abattoirs and processing plants, because they're simply just they're points of failure, and they're centralized in their points of failure. So, if we can reduce that level of centralization and go back to a really grassroots kind of movement, then everyone wins. The farmer wins; they make more money. They're able to keep their farm. The cow wins because it's finally treated ethically, and it's able to live in its appropriate environment. And you win because you're getting food that you know where it's come from, and you know it's the most nutrient dense. So, I mean, those are all the kind of positive externalities of this approach. And look, so many people can be sitting behind their computer or just commenting on YouTube. Like, how about next weekend? I mean, here's a suggestion: instead of sitting down and watching your phone, actually look up a regenerative farm and go ask them to meet them and go to that farm. Have a look around. These people are so willing and lovely and welcoming. They'll want to show you around. So go and talk to the farmer and make a day out of it. Meet your farmer, buy some beef off them, and it's a great way to be involved. And it's actually something you can do rather than just talking about or typing online about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Max, I think you got it figured out big time. So just keep going and keep talking about it. How do people find you? How do people get more from you?
Yeah, so if you just type in, so I have a podcast, the Regenerative Health Podcast, and talking to regenerative farmers, lifestyle doctors, cutting edge health optimization people, just everything that is regarding holistic health. Also an interest in fertility and helping couples kind of optimize their fertility before trying to conceive, because I mean, that's another whole issue that we haven't even talked about, which is declining sperm counts and reproductive problems. So the Regenerative Health Podcast is on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts. I'm on Twitter at mgulhanemd, and I'm on Instagram at Dr._Max_Gulhane. And then I'm consulting here in Albury in general practice at the Gardens Medical Group. And you can ring up, and if you want to see me or get consulted, I can do telehealth for anyone in Australia. There won't be a Medicare rebate, or else you can come and see me in person. So those are the main channels that I'm active through at the moment.
Very cool.
Love it.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot, man. It was good to see you again, and a pleasure to have you on, and great to hear your thoughts on everything.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. Thanks, and Simon. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to your audience. Thanks a lot.
Our pleasure. Thanks for joining, Matt.